All right, welcome back. So, the Meditations on First Philosophy. Not Descartes' first book, not his first work of philosophy, not even his first attempt to lay out his entire philosophical methodology, but certainly his best known work and most complete attempt to lay out his philosophical methodology. Although he does that as well in a book called The Discourse on Methods, which was written much earlier. In the Meditations, Descartes takes us through a series of six reflections, six meditations on his own thinking. It is a book written in the form of a theological meditation like St. Augustine might have written or did write, where he is reflecting on his own journey, reflecting on how he came to the position that he is now in, how he came to understand the world in the way that he now does. So we should take this idea of a meditation seriously. It is a kind of reflection, a form of reflection. A form of reflective writing that he is doing. The Meditations, Descartes claims, lays out his philosophical system, but it also lays out or contains, he says, the foundations of physics. It is not only laying out his philosophical position, but also laying the foundations for and beginning the work of the physics that he thinks, or the physical theory that he thinks explains the world that we inhabit. So it's also a scientific text, not merely a philosophical text from Descartes' perspective. But we're going to focus on the philosophical part, and we're going to focus on really the epistemological dimensions, that is, those that have to do with the theory of knowledge, the epistemological dimensions of the text. We're going to work through his arguments that introduce the method of doubt and radical skepticism, the arguments for the distinction between mind and body, or understanding mind and body as distinct substances. We're going to work through his argument that shows that the mind is better known or more readily known than the body is. We're going to think a little bit about his foundationalist epistemology and what that means. And we're going to explore the foundation of his epistemology, the foundation of all knowledge for Descartes, the cogito, I am, I exist. I exist as a thinking thing. And we're going to look at his proof, or one of his proofs for the existence of God. So that will be our approach to the Meditations on First Philosophy. Let's begin at the beginning with Descartes. Descartes begins the first meditation, or begins laying out his meditations in his introduction, in fact, by explaining where he first came up with these ideas, where he first developed his thinking along these lines, and where he first conceived of the methods that he is employing in these meditations. He tells us that during the 30 Years' War, while he was staying in a small inn in Neuburg, in Germany, in November of 1619, as he was returning from the coronation of Ferdinand V as the Holy Roman Emperor, back to the army, back to the front lines, where he was at the time employed as a gentleman soldier. He stayed in this small inn. And while he was in this inn in November 1619, he had a dream. Actually, he had a series of 3 dreams in which he said it was revealed to him what his life's path would be, how he should pursue knowledge over the course of his life, and what the appropriate methods were for engaging in this sort of reflection, engaging in this sort of pursuit. And in many ways, the meditations are a reconstruction of what Descartes encountered in those dreams, a reconstruction of the form of thought that was revealed to him, or that he claims was revealed to him in these dreams. Now, in the story that Descartes tells us, he tells us that he is in a puella. It's a Latin word. He wrote in Latin, not in French. He is in a puella, which is a stove-heated room, or perhaps the stove that heats the room, a ceramic stove sitting in the corner that would be heated up, and then as the fire went out, it held heat and radiated out into the room. A small room. But I like to think of Descartes as actually being in the puella, in the stove itself, because the first steps toward radical doubt for Descartes are to remove himself from the world around him, to completely isolate himself from all of the things that are external to him, that are out there. And so I picture him curled up in this little stove, isolated from the world, pursuing these reflections on what he could possibly know about that world that's out there, outside of the puella. So maybe have that thought in your mind. Maybe have that picture of Descartes just curled up in his little puella, thinking about the world outside. This solipsistic thought, as we're going to see. So how do we begin developing this radical Cartesian skepticism? I want to walk through the skeptical progression that Descartes advances in the first meditation. He begins by reflecting on all of his ideas, all of his thoughts, all of his beliefs. And he asks himself, where do they come from? Where do most of my beliefs come from? Well, most of my beliefs I have learned or have come to hold either through my senses or through the testimony of others. So I believe things because I've seen them to be the case, because I have done the experiments and learned from those experiments, because I have gone out and fiddled with things in the world. I've gone out and dissected bodies. I've gone out and thrown stones in water, right? And I've learned from these experiences through my senses what the world around me is like. And I have learned much of what I've learned from testimony, from what others tell me, from what my teachers have taught me, from books that I've read, from newspapers and articles that I have read. This testimony of others is something that I rely a great deal on. Without the testimony of others, without relying on what others have taught me or have told me, I'd have very little knowledge at all. There's very little that I can know without relying on others. So that's where most of my knowledge comes from. Well, is it trustworthy? Should I rely on that knowledge? Should I rely on those beliefs from my senses and from the testimony of others? Have I ever been lied to? Sure. Others have misled me, sometimes purposefully, sometimes by accident, because they didn't know what they were talking about, even though they thought they did. And so I've been misled by the testimony of others. I've come to discover that what others have told me is false. So they're not 100% reliable. I can't always trust them. I can't always take for granted that what they have told me is true. So I'd better set that aside. I can't trust it, and I don't yet have a test to determine which of those beliefs is true and which of them is false. Moreover, my senses have misled me. I've often been misled into thinking that something was, when I look off into the distance, that some object that I was trying to get to out in the distance was closer than it appeared to me, or was further away than it appeared to me, or that it was smaller than it appeared to be to me, or that it was bigger than it appeared to be to me. If you've ever taken a straight stick, and submerged it half in water, your senses have been misled into thinking that it was bent. Right? If If you just relied on what your eyes showed you, you'd think that was a stick that had a bend in it, even though you know it doesn't. So our senses mislead us. I can't trust them in every instance. So I also should set those aside. Descartes says, unless I can be 100% sure that the deliverances of my senses and of testimony are reliable, then I won't trust them. Just like I won't trust a friend or an acquaintance who I know lies to me quite frequently until I come up with a test to determine when they're lying and when they're not. I won't trust my senses or testimony until I come up with such a test. So, what must I doubt if I can't trust either my senses or the testimony of others? Well, I can't know any particular matters of fact, is what Descartes says. I can't know anything particular about the way the world is. I can't know anything, any particular matters of fact about how things are in the world around me. I can't know the particular colors of objects. I can't know who is in a particular place at a particular time. I can't know what events have happened in particular places at particular times. And I can't know these particular matters of fact. I still might know general truths. I might know, for example, that every object has a color, because it couldn't be perceived otherwise. I might know mathematical truths, or abstract truths, like 2 + 2 = 4. Those I don't have reason to doubt yet. But anything that I would have relied on my senses or testimony to know, any particular claims about how the world is, those I have to call into doubt for now. That's the first step of the skeptical progression. So we haven't gone very far yet, but we already call into doubt our knowledge about the world around us. I can't trust my senses, and I can't trust testimony 100%. I don't know when I can and when I can't. I don't have a good test yet. So I have to doubt everything that I've ever learned through the senses or through testimony. We'll pick up with the second step of the skeptical progression in the next lecture.